In 2023, a new term was coined in the climate tech world, FOAK, meaning building a first-of-a-kind factory project. Now, this year, climate tech startups found that after they proved that the technology could work in the lab or on the pilot, getting the money to build the FOAK and actually building it was a completely different challenge. This resulted in many startups perishing in the valley of death. I've written quite a few epitaphs on those who didn't make it this year, like Universal Hydrogen, Redflow, and Arrival, with the biggest corpse left lying in this valley in 2024 is undoubtedly Northvolt's. I'm Emin Askerov, a scale-up consigliere and a host of a podcast What's Up with Startups. All the tech we need to achieve net zero goals have been invented. Now, we need to scale and deploy it. And it's not as easy as it sounds. In my podcast, I speak with climate tech founders about the challenges of scaling up and deploying climate tech solutions, including fundraising for the folks, building teams and factories, negotiating with corporate clients, and other organizational challenges of growing a climate tech company. In this special episode, I recap on what a year it was for climate tech and for this podcast, and try to see what next year will hold. So, without further ado, welcome to this very special 13th episode of What's Up with Startups. And let's start with money. 2024 was the year climate tech investment industry matured, finally. More and more investors realized that scaling up hardware is hard. Climate-focused investors with long-term horizons started crowding out generalist and short-term investors. For example, according to Climate Tech VC, a data provider, private equity investors couldn't stand the heat and started to get the hell out of the kitchen. Their participation in FOAK and hard tech startups declined. The investment pace slowed and investors became more selective and cautious. Total assets under management, though, increased by 20% to a total of 164 billion. It's a modest growth. Overall, I welcome this news as I've almost lost faith in investor sanity after seeing wildly optimistic hydrogen and nuclear projects receive tons of cash. So, what were the main stories that caused investors to wisen up? Let's start with some of the success stories that didn't make headlines, but which I had a chance to view from the front seat. In my end of the year review blog post, I've named JR Energy Solution, a startup from Korea, as a success of the year. Why is that? First, because they've shown how to flawlessly execute a climate hardware project. This February, they launched a 500 megawatt-hour lithium-ion electrode factory after only 9 months earlier given it the start. They focus on manufacturing as a service for electrodes, which is the most difficult part of the battery making process. They help startups in battery stage to go straight to customer without building their own factories, and they help gigaplayers to test the new recipes in the factory environment at the minimum viable scale. You can deep dive in the story and experience of JR Energy Solution if you listen to the episode 6 of this podcast, where I interview Duke O, the founder of JR Energy Solution. I would also name Atome, a startup in making fertilizers, a success of the year. Atome is an example of sound approach to clean hydrogen, something that is sorely lacking right now. I've interviewed its CEO and founder, Olivier Musat, in the episode 7, and man, what an insight that was in planning, organizing, and financing a huge FOAK project like that. I'm naming it here second after JR Energy Solution only because Atome is still in the construction process of the FOAK. Now, as I've said in the opening lines of this episode, this year saw a lot of corpses added to the Valley of Death, with the biggest one being Northvolt. The spectacular fall from EU climate tech darling and top fundraiser to losing major contracts and filing for bankruptcy. There was no better illustration that execution is everything and vision is nothing. My most commended and liked LinkedIn post of the year was about perils of battery manufacturing, published 2 months before Northvolt declared bankruptcy. I'd love to make an episode someday with a C-level Northvolt insider to pick apart what went wrong exactly. For now, there are 2 other episodes from 2 other climate tech podcasts to which you can listen if you want to get a pretty accurate lowdown on what went wrong. You'll find all the links to podcasts and articles I mentioned here in the show notes. Switching now to a lighter tone, every year has its fads, and people are later embarrassed of admitting to follow them. So this year, as the hype around hydrogen started to deflate, another bubble formed. Energy-hungry AI and data center companies looking for low-carbon energy started backing up ridiculous small modular nuclear reactor startups. There is no proof that SMARs, as the acronym they known by goes, deliver cost savings. The history of nuclear reactor design and the only functional SMR in Russia shows differently. Yet, investors see no problem with transferring software cause and effect patterns onto nuclear reactor design. I didn't get a chance to record a podcast episode on it, but I wrote a blog post, the link you can find in the show notes. I bet that in a couple of years we will witness SMRs incinerate another pile of investors' cash. Just make sure you're watching this from a safe distance. Now, no year-end review is complete without some book and podcast recommendations. My book pick of the year is The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen. Despite this book being published over 2 decades ago, its lessons hold true today, especially for the automotive industry, as incumbents struggle to compete against disruptors like BYD and Tesla. My review of the book was one of the best read posts on my website, scoring more than 130 views. If you haven't yet read it yet, grab a copy, read over your holidays. Your view on innovation will never be the same. The title of the podcast of the year goes to the episode titled Is Hydrogen the Fuel of the Future? By Climate Insiders. Hydrogen is a highly controversial topic, and people often sharply divided between ardent supporters and haters. I like this episode because of its clarity of thinking of its guest, Ben James. This episode was a breath of fresh air with crisp analysis and deep insight at what promise of hydrogen holds for the future. You'll find the links to the episode and my short review of the show in the show notes. Now, let's pick in 2025 and talk about the elephant in the room, where scale-ups can get information and help about scaling up hard tech. The so-called missing middle and the FOAK financing started to be mentioned more frequently this year, albeit by investors' crowd. I've read every single article I could find and listened to every single podcast mentioning FOAK and came back disappointed. 99% of all views published are either by journalists who have no first-hand experience of FOAK or VCs who do risk but do not manage the process. Thus, the recommendations boil down to basically how to get money for FOAK rather than how to actually succeed in building it. I've reviewed one such guide called Climate Bricks in my blog. The short takeaway is this. If you need money for your FOAK, do as they say. If you need to actually build your FOAK, throw it away and do something different. The fact that Climate Bricks showcase Northvolt as an example of success is telling. Well, Northvolt was extremely successful in fundraising and not at all in delivery. The challenge to provide a guide to scaling up is an urgent one, and there is no source out there shedding light and guiding you through the valley of death. Now, I've taken up this challenge and devoted a section of my blog to all things about scaling up climate tech. There are currently 39 posts in this section, making it by far the biggest part of my blog. Next year, I will be adding more substance to this section, aiming to create a full-scale, hands-on guide to scaling up your clean-tech hardware startup. As usual, it will be packed with insight from my experience and those of founders I've interviewed who are scaling their tech right now. I will also add more insight from investors, corporate strategy and purchasing managers, suppliers, and accelerators so that you get a panorama of views and know in advance what your counterparts expect. So make sure you subscribe to my blog and see the playbook developed in real time. Wrapping up this special year-end episode, let's do a brief recap of what What's Up with Startups did. This was the first year that I was doing podcasting. What's Up with Startups aired 12 episodes, so an average of 1 episode per month. Every episode we recorded gave me a ton of things to think on, and I hope that you enjoyed them too. I'd like to take a moment to thank all my guests who took time to answer my questions and wish them all Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, good luck in scaling up their ventures. I also would like to thank the team at the New Energy Advancement Hub. Thank you guys and girls for editing, publishing, spreading the word, and for making this podcast possible. You are doing an incredible job. And if you haven't yet checked out the new Energy Advancement Hub website and YouTube channel, make sure you do. They've got tons of free stuff on energy transition, courses, interviews, deep dives, and even games. So visit the website at www.neahhub.net. Also, if you like this podcast, you will enjoy my weekly newsletter, EcoPunk, where I deep dive in issues of scaling up climate tech. This year, the number of subscribers of this newsletter on LinkedIn grew 5 times, reaching over 1,000 people. Subscribe on LinkedIn or just enter your email in the blog section of my website and get email every time I post. With this, I'd like to close this very special episode. I want to thank you all for the interest in What's Up with Startups and wish you good luck, good health, and success in 2025. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. One final note. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share this podcast on Spotify or YouTube, and follow me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and my website, www.askerov.pro, for more clean tech scale-up content. Good luck in 2025.